Have you ever wondered how someone could go from being sold into servitude to commanding a fleet of over 70,000 pirates? Or how centuries ago women created entire communities, bustling with trade and free from the usual rules of marriage and male authority, right in the heart of major cities? Could you imagine women in the wild American West, not just surviving but claiming vast acres of land all by themselves, building farms and shaping their own destinies long before anyone thought it was even possible? And what about the quiet revolutionaries, the women who, without fanfare, chose a life partner of the same sex in an era that barely had a name for it, creating homes filled with support and independence? The history books are filled with tales of battles and kings, but tucked within their pages are equally astonishing stories of single individuals who, against all odds, carved out lives of incredible independence. Ready to discover some of the most resourceful, daring, and downright clever ways singles throughout history didn't just cope, they thrived. Number 10. The traveling trailblazers who carved their own paths on the open road. Imagine a time when a woman's place was strictly thought to be in the home, under the watchful eye of a father or husband. Now picture this. Women packing their bags, not for a supervised visit to a relative, but to strike out on their own, making a living by moving from town to town. This wasn't the common story, but for a determined few, the open road became a highway to an independent life. These weren't just wanderers. They were sharp entrepreneurs, skilled performers, and brave souls who saw opportunity where others saw only danger or impropriety. Consider the women who became itinerant traders or peddlers. In centuries past, long before online shopping or even department stores, many goods reached remote areas through people who carried their wares with them. While men often dominated these roles, some women found their niche. They might sell small but essential items, notions like needles and thread, ribbons, medicines they concocted themselves, books, or even specialized tools. To do this, a woman had to be incredibly resourceful. She needed to know how to manage her money, how to bargain for supplies, how to protect herself and her goods on lonely roads, and how to persuade strangers to buy from her. She was her own boss, her own accountant, and her own security guard. This life required immense courage and a sharp mind. She would learn which towns were welcoming, which routes were safest, and what goods people truly needed or desired. Her independence was hard-won, built on her wits and her willingness to take risks that most women of her time were discouraged from even considering. She wasn't just selling goods. She was selling her own ability to navigate the world on her own terms. Then there were the performers. Think of the traveling circuses, the vaudeville troupes, the medicine shows, and the solo entertainers. Among them were women who juggled, sang, danced, acted, or performed astounding feats of skill. Annie Oakley is a famous example, a sharpshooter who amazed audiences around the world with her incredible marksmanship. She wasn't just a performer. She was a businesswoman who managed her career, her image, and her finances. But there were many others, perhaps less famous, who earned their living on the stage, however small or grand. For a single woman, this life offered a degree of freedom and financial independence that was rare. It was a world away from domestic service or factory work, the more common options for women needing to earn their own keep. These performers often faced social stigma, as a life on the road and on display was seen as less than respectable by some. The trade-off was a level of autonomy and the chance to use their talents to support themselves, often living in close-knit, unconventional communities of fellow performers who understood their lifestyle. They built lives around their skills, their charisma, and their sheer audacity, proving that a home could be wherever their talent took them. They chose applause and the open road over the confines of a more traditional existence. And in doing so, they crafted truly independent lives. One town, one show, one sale at a time. Their ingenuity lay in their ability to turn their unique talents or their business acumen into a mobile livelihood, a way of life that defied easy categorization but offered a precious self-made freedom. Number 9. The surplus women who reshaped society after the Great Wars. The early 20th century saw devastating global conflicts, particularly the First World War, which changed the world in countless ways. One of the most profound and personal impacts was on the demographics of many nations. Millions of young men who would have become husbands and fathers never returned from the battlefields. This left behind a generation of women who, in the stark language of the time, were sometimes called surplus women or war spinsters because the sheer number of available men for marriage had drastically decreased. Society had long been structured around the idea that a woman's ultimate role was to marry and raise a family. Suddenly, for a vast number of women, this path was simply not available. This wasn't a personal choice for many, it was a demographic reality. Faced with this unprecedented situation, these women didn't just fade into the background. They had to find ingenious ways to build meaningful, independent lives. The war itself had already given many women a taste of different roles. With men away fighting, women had stepped into factories, driven ambulances, worked on farms, and taken on jobs previously considered exclusively male. They had proven their capabilities and, for many, earned their own wages for the first time. This experience, combined with the post-war demographic shift, became a catalyst for change. Many of these women pursued education and careers with a new vigor. Teaching and nursing had long been somewhat acceptable professions for women. But now the range of opportunities, though still limited by today's standards, began to expand. Women increasingly entered clerical work, becoming secretaries, typists, and telephone operators in the growing bureaucracies and businesses of the era. Some pushed into new fields like journalism, social work, or even science and academia, though they often faced significant barriers and lower pay than men. Their income might not have been vast, but it provided a degree of economic independence that was crucial. They could support themselves, and sometimes even other family members. Beyond work, these women also forged new social structures. Without the traditional path of marriage readily available, female friendships and shared living arrangements became even more important. Women roomed together, forming households that provided companionship and mutual support. They created social clubs, joined political movements, and contributed to their communities in ways that didn't depend on marital status. Some women found deep, lifelong partnerships with other women, relationships that provided emotional and domestic stability in a world where marriage to a man was less likely. These weren't always overtly romantic relationships in the way we might understand them today, but they were profound bonds of companionship and mutual care that sustained independent lives. The ingenuity of these surplus women lay in their collective adaptation to a radically altered social landscape. They didn't have a pre-written script for how to live as a large cohort of unmarried women in a society that still prioritized marriage. So, they wrote their own. They took the skills and confidence gained during wartime, sought out education and employment, and built supportive female networks. They navigated a world that wasn't designed for them, and in doing so, subtly began to reshape societal expectations about what a woman's life could be. They demonstrated that a fulfilling and independent life was possible even without a husband, a quiet revolution born out of demographic necessity and female resilience. Their legacy was not just in the jobs they did or the households they formed, but in the way they expanded the definition of a woman's place in the world. Number 8. The factory girls who forged independence amidst the industrial roar. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the late 18th century and thundering through the 19th, utterly transformed how people lived and worked. As giant factories powered by steam and new machinery sprang up in cities, they created an insatiable demand for labor. And surprisingly, or perhaps predictably, given the desire for cheap labor, many of these new workers were young, single women, often migrating from rural areas in search of a livelihood. These factory girls, as they came to be known, stepped into a world vastly different from the agricultural lives their families had known for generations, and in doing so, they found a new, if often harsh, form of independence. One of Aim's stenju examples of this phenomenon was the Lowell mill system in Massachusetts, starting in the early 1820s. The founders of Lowell envisioned a new kind of industrial enterprise, employing young, unmarried women from the New England countryside. These Lowell mill girls were offered wages which, while low by modern standards, were often more than they could earn in their rural communities through traditional female occupations like domestic service. They lived in company-owned boarding houses, supervised by older women, and were expected to adhere to strict moral codes and attend church. This structured environment was partly designed to reassure families that their daughters would be safe and properly cared for. For these young women, life in the mills was incredibly demanding. The work was arduous, the hours long, often 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the conditions in the textile factories could be noisy, dusty, and dangerous. However, despite these hardships, the experience offered something revolutionary for many: economic independence. For the first time, they were earning their own money. This income gave them a degree of personal freedom they had never known. They could save for a dowry, send money home to support their families, or spend it on themselves, on clothes, books, or other small luxuries. This financial autonomy, however modest, was a significant step towards self-reliance. Beyond the wages, life in places like Lowell also fostered a unique female community and intellectual growth. Living and working together, these women formed strong bonds of friendship and support. In their limited leisure time, many pursued educational opportunities. Lowell became known for its improvement circles, where women would gather to share their writings, listen to lectures, and debate ideas. They even published their own literary magazine, the Lowell Offering, filled with poems, stories, and essays written by the mill girls themselves. This intellectual ferment was a remarkable outcome of their new lives. They were not just laborers. They were thinkers, writers, and active participants in a vibrant subculture they create. Their ingenuity lay in their ability to carve out a space for themselves within this new industrial order. They seized the opportunity for paid work, endured its hardships, and used their earnings and their collective life to expand their horizons. When working conditions deteriorated or wages were cut, these factory girls also demonstrated early forms of labor activism. They organized turnouts or strikes, protesting for better pay and shorter hours. While not always successful, these actions showed their growing assertiveness and their understanding of their collective power. They were learning to navigate a complex new world, not just as individuals, but as a group with shared interests. Factory life was by no means an easy path to independence, and for many it was a temporary phase before marriage. But for a significant period, it offered young single women a chance to earn their own way, experience life outside their native villages, gain education, and form lasting bonds, all of which contributed to a sense of self-sufficiency and a broader understanding of the world. They were pioneers of a new kind of female independence, forged in the heat and noise of the burgeoning industrial age. Number 7. The Venetian courtesan who wielded poetry and wit as her power. In 16th century, Venice, a city renowned for its opulence, art, and somewhat liberal social mores, there existed a class of women known as courtigiane honeste, or honest courtesans. These were not common streetwalkers. They were often highly educated, cultured women who offered not just physical companionship, but also intellectual conversation, musical talents, and social grace to the wealthy and powerful men of the city and its many visitors. Among the most celebrated of these figures was Veronica Franco, a woman who ingeniously navigated the precarious world of a courtesan to achieve a remarkable degree of independence, influence, and even literary fame. Born around 1546, Veronica Franco was herself the daughter of a courtigiana onesta, and she was trained from a young age in the arts necessary for such a life. This included learning literature, music, and how to engage in witty and intelligent discourse. In a society where most women, even those of the upper classes, received limited formal education, the intellectual accomplishments of women like Veronica were notable. She became known for her beauty, certainly, but also for her sharp mind, her skill as a poet, and her ability to hold her own in the sophisticated salons of Venice. Veronica Franco's independence was built upon her ability to attract and maintain the patronage of influential men. This was a delicate and often dangerous game. She had to be a skilled negotiator, managing her finances, her household, and her reputation in a world where she had few legal protections. Unlike married women who were under the legal authority of their husbands, or women in convents who were part of a religious institution, Veronica was in many ways her own agent. She published 2 volumes of her own poetry, Terza Rime and Liter Familiari e Diversi, which included not only her poems, but also letters to her patrons and friends. This act of publishing her work was itself a bold move for a woman of her time and profession. Her poetry was often passionate, intelligent, and surprisingly frank, sometimes defending women and challenging the societal double standards they faced. One of her most famous works is a series of poems in which she engages in a poetic duel with a male detractor, Maffeo Venier. In these verses, she fiercely defends her honor and her profession, using her wit and literary skill as weapons. She didn't shy away from the realities of her life, but framed it with intelligence and a demand for respect. Her ingenuity lay in her ability to turn the very tools of high culture, poetry, rhetoric, intellectual debate into instruments for her own advancement and defense. She leveraged her intellect and artistic talents to create a persona that was alluring, formidable, and financially viable. Veronica Franco also showed a surprising degree of social consciousness for her position. She once proposed to the Venetian Senate the creation of a home for fallen women to be funded by the wealthy, though her proposal was not adopted. This suggests a level of empathy and a desire to improve the lot of other women in difficult circumstances. Her life was not without its trials. She faced public scandal, accusations of witchcraft, from which she successfully defended herself, likely with the help of powerful friends, and the constant vulnerability associated with her profession. Yet, through it all, she managed to raise her children, maintain her household, and leave behind a literary legacy that continues to be studied today. Her independence was not the conventional kind, and it came at a social cost. But within the constraints of her era and her circumstances, Veronica Franco ingeniously crafted a life that gave her a voice, a degree of financial autonomy, and a platform for her considerable talents. She used the system available to her, however flawed, and bent it to her will, becoming a published author and a recognized intellectual figure in a world dominated by men. She showed that even in the most unconventional of roles, a single woman could find ways to assert her agency and leave her mark. Number 6. When Victorian women partnered up for life, love, and independence. The Victorian era, roughly spanning from the 1830s to the turn of the 20th century, is often stereotyped as a time of rigid social conventions, particularly concerning gender roles and marriage. For women, marriage was widely considered the primary goal and a necessity for social respectability and economic security. A single woman, a spinster, often faced a precarious existence, dependent on reluctant relatives or limited, poorly paid employment options. Yet within this restrictive environment, a fascinating and quietly revolutionary way for some single women to build independent lives emerged: the Boston marriage. The term Boston marriage became popular in New England towards the end of the 19th century, largely inspired by Henry James's novel, The Bostonians, which depicted such a relationship. It described a household where two women, typically educated and financially independent to some degree, chose to live together in a long-term, committed partnership. These relationships were often deeply loving and emotionally sustaining, providing the companionship and domestic stability that many might otherwise have sought in a traditional marriage to a man. Crucially, these arrangements allowed women a significant degree of independence from male control and the societal expectations that came with heterosexual marriage. Women who entered into Boston marriages were often pioneers in their own right. Many were college-educated, a new phenomenon for women at the time, and pursued professional careers as writers, academics, social reformers, or artists. Living together allowed them to pool their resources, making it more feasible to maintain a comfortable home and support their professional endeavors. It also provided a supportive domestic environment, where they could focus on their work without the extensive household duties typically expected of a wife in a patriarchal marriage, or the social isolation that might come with living entirely alone. Consider figures like Sarah Orne Jewett, a celebrated author, and Annie Adams Fields, a writer and literary hostess. They lived together for many years in a devoted partnership that was central to both their personal lives and their literary careers. Their home was a hub of intellectual and artistic activity. Similarly, Frances Willard, a prominent temperance reformer and suffragist, shared her life and home with Anna Adams Gordon for decades. These partnerships were not necessarily hidden and were often accepted within their social circles as a respectable, if somewhat unconventional, way for unmarried women to live. The ingenuity of the Boston marriage lay in its subtle subversion of traditional norms. It offered a socially acceptable framework for women to create autonomous lives centered on female companionship and shared purpose. While the exact nature of the romantic or physical intimacy within these relationships varied and is often difficult for historians to ascertain definitively due to the private nature of such matters, and the different ways love and affection were expressed in the past, it is clear that these were profound bonds of love, loyalty, and mutual support. They provided an alternative to spinsterhood's potential loneliness or the constraints of traditional marriage. These women ingeniously crafted a third way. They didn't reject domesticity entirely, but they redefined it on their own terms, creating homes that were havens of intellectual stimulation, emotional support, and female solidarity. They could pursue their ambitions, contribute to society through their work, and enjoy a rich personal life, all while remaining independent of direct male authority. The Boston marriage was a testament to women's ability to find creative solutions to societal limitations, forging paths to independence and fulfillment by prioritizing their relationships with other women. It was a quiet but powerful statement about the value of female bonds and the possibility of building a satisfying life outside the conventional script. Number 5. The nun who became a visionary, composer, and healer outside the patriarchy's walls. In the High Middle Ages, a period when women's roles were largely confined to wife, mother, or worker within a family unit, the Christian convent offered a surprising, and for some, an empowering alternative path to a life of intellectual pursuit, spiritual authority, and a unique form of independence. While convent life was certainly structured and demanding, for certain extraordinary women, It became a space where their talents could flourish in ways that would have been impossible in the secular world. One of the most remarkable examples of such a woman is Hildegard von Bingen, a German Benedictine abbess, writer, composer, philosopher, mystic, visionary, and medical writer who lived in the 12th century. Born the 10th child to a noble family, Hildegard was dedicated to the church at a young age, a practice known as oblation. She was enclosed with an older anchoress, Jutta von Sponheim, and received an education in religious texts, Latin, and music. This education itself was a privilege not afforded to most women of her time. When Jutta died, Hildegard was elected as the magistra, or spiritual leader, of her growing community of nuns. This position already granted her a degree of authority. However, Hildegard's true genius and her path to a wider, more unconventional form of influence began with the powerful religious visions she claimed to have experienced since childhood. For many years, Hildegard hesitated to speak about her visions, fearing disbelief or condemnation. However, at the age of 42, she received what she described as a divine command to write what you see and hear. With the support of her confessor and the local archbishop, she began to document her mystical experiences. This resulted in her first major theological work, Scivias, Know the Ways of the Lord, a complex and beautifully illustrated account of her visions exploring themes of creation, redemption, and the nature of the cosmos. Writing such a profound theological work was an extraordinary achievement for a woman in an era when theological discourse was almost exclusively the domain of male clergy. Hildegard's ingenuity was multifaceted. Firstly, she skillfully navigated the male-dominated church hierarchy to gain approval and legitimacy for her visions and writings. She corresponded with popes, emperors, and other influential figures, offering them spiritual counsel and sometimes bold admonitions. Her reputation as a prophetess and a woman of profound holiness grew, giving her a voice that resonated far beyond her convent walls. Secondly, she was a prolific and innovative composer. She wrote an extensive body of liturgical music, including hymns, antiphons, and a morality play called Ordo Virtutum, which is considered one of the earliest known examples of its kind. Her music is renowned for its soaring melodies and unique style, distinct from the Gregorian chant common at the time. This creative output demonstrated a remarkable artistic independence. Furthermore, Hildegard was a keen observer of the natural world and wrote two significant scientific and medical texts, Physica and Causae et Curae. These works detailed the medicinal properties of plants, animals, and stones, and discussed human physiology and disease from a holistic perspective, blending traditional folk knowledge with her own observations and theological understanding. She effectively ran an infirmary and offered healing advice, making her a respected medical authority. Perhaps one of her most assertive acts of independence was her decision to move her community of nuns from the monastery of Disibodenberg, where they were attached to a male monastic community, to a new independent convent she founded at Rupertsberg, and later another at Eiben. This move faced considerable resistance from the monks at Disibodenberg, who did not want to lose the prestige and income associated with Hildegard's growing fame and her community. However, Hildegard persevered, arguing that it was God's will for her nuns to have their own space. This physical separation was a crucial step in establishing the autonomy of her female religious community. Hildegard von Bingen lived a life of extraordinary intellectual and spiritual productivity. Within the framework of religious life, which for many might seem restrictive, she found a way to become an influential theologian, a celebrated composer, a respected healer, and a powerful abbess, who corresponded with the great leaders of her day. Her ingenuity lay in her ability to harness her profound spiritual experiences, her sharp intellect, and her unwavering conviction to carve out a sphere of significant authority and creative expression, making her one of the most remarkable and independently influential women of the Middle Ages. Number 4. The gutsy gals who claimed their own slice of the Wild West. When we picture the American West in the latter half of the 19th century, the images that often come to mind are of rugged cowboys, male prospectors seeking gold, and families in covered wagons led by determined patriarchs. But there's another, often overlooked group of pioneers who played a vital role in settling the frontier: single women homesteaders. Thanks to legislation like the Homestead Act of 1862, an unmarried woman who was the head of a household could claim 160 acres of federal land, provided she lived on it, cultivated it, and made improvements over 5 years. This was a revolutionary opportunity for women seeking independence and a life of their own. Thousands of women, including widows, divorces, and never-married women, seized this chance. They came from diverse backgrounds. Some were immigrants, others were daughters of farming families seeking their own land, and some were educated women looking for adventure or a new start. The motivations were varied: economic self-sufficiency, the desire to own property in their own name, a right not always available elsewhere, or simply the allure of building a life on their own terms on the vast open prairies. The life of a female homesteader was incredibly challenging. These women faced the same harsh conditions as male homesteaders: unpredictable weather, difficult soil, isolation, and the backbreaking labor of farming. They had to build their own homes, which were often simple sod houses or log cabins. They plowed fields, planted crops, tended livestock, dug wells, and fenced their land. Many did this work entirely on their own, or perhaps with the help of a hired hand, if they could afford it. They learned new skills out of necessity, becoming proficient carpenters, farmers, and veterinarians. Their ingenuity was on display every single day as they figured out how to survive and succeed in an often unforgiving environment. These women had to be incredibly resilient and resourceful. They battled loneliness, crop failures, prairie fires, and blizzards. They learned to hunt and trap for food, to preserve what they grew, and to make do with very little. Community, when it could be found, was vital. Women homesteaders often supported each other, sharing labor, tools, and companionship. They built schools and churches, contributing to the social fabric of the emerging frontier settlements. What made their endeavor particularly ingenious was their navigation of both the legal system and societal expectations. The Homestead Act provided the legal opening, but these women had to have the courage to step outside traditional gender roles. A woman running her own farm, making her own business decisions, and living independently was not the norm. Yet, on the frontier, necessity often trumped convention. These women proved that they were just as capable as men of taming the land and building a successful enterprise. Their success was measured not just in the acres they cultivated or the crops they harvested, but in the independence they achieved. Owning land gave them economic security and a status they might never have attained otherwise. They were property owners, decision makers, and masters of their own domain. Many letters and diaries from these women reveal a deep sense of pride in their accomplishments and a profound connection to the land they had worked so hard to make their own. Some eventually married, often combining their homestead with that of their husband, but many remained single, content with the independent lives they had built. These single women homesteaders were not just passive participants in westward expansion. They were active agents, shaping their own destinies and contributing significantly to the settlement and development of the American West. Their story is one of extraordinary courage, resilience, and a clever use of an unprecedented legal opportunity to achieve a level of independence that was rare for women of their time. They literally built their independent lives from the ground up, transforming barren prairie into productive farms, and in the process, transforming themselves into symbols of female strength and self-reliance. Number 3, the laundress who became a self-made hair care millionaire. Turn of the 20th century, opportunities for African American women were severely limited by both racial discrimination and gender inequality. Most were confined to low-paying jobs as domestic servants, laundresses, or farm laborers. Yet, against this backdrop of immense systemic challenges, Sarah Breedlove, later known as Madam C.J. Walker, rose from poverty and hardship to become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history, building a hair care and cosmetics empire specifically for Black women, and in doing so, creating not only her own profound independence, but also pathways to not only her own but for thousands of others. Born in 1867 on a Louisiana cotton plantation to parents who had been enslaved, Sarah was orphaned at the age of 7. She married at 14, partly to escape an abusive home environment, and was widowed by 20, left with a young daughter, Alelia. She moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where she worked as a laundress for over a decade, earning barely enough to support herself and her child. Like many Black women of her era, Sarah suffered from scalp ailments and hair loss, common problems due to harsh hair treatments, poor diet, and infrequent bathing opportunities. Her personal struggle with hair loss became the catalyst for her autophagy journey. In the early 1900s, she began experimenting with various commercial hair care products and her own home remedies. Around 1905, she moved to Denver, Colorado, where she initially worked as a sales agent for Annie Turnbow Malone, another Black woman entrepreneur in the hair care industry. It was during this time, as she learned about the business and refined her own formulas, that she claimed to have developed her own successful hair-growing treatment, which she said came to her in a dream. She married Charles Joseph Walker, a newspaper advertising salesman, who helped her with marketing, and she began styling herself as Madam C.J. Walker. Madam Walker's ingenuity was multifaceted. First, she identified a deep, unmet need within the Black community. At a time when beauty standards were overwhelmingly white-centric, she developed and marketed products specifically designed for the hair textures and needs of Black women. Her Walker system included scalp preparation, lotions, and iron combs. She emphasized hair, health, and grooming as a means of promoting self-esteem and respectability for Black women. Second, she was a brilliant marketer and businesswoman. She started by selling her products door to door, giving demonstrations, and building a personal connection with her customers. As her business grew, she established Lelia College in Pittsburgh to train her sales agents, known as Walker agents. These agents, all Black women, were taught not only how to sell the products, but also how to run their own businesses, manage their finances, and become financially independent themselves. This created a vast network of thousands of women across the United States, the Caribbean, and Latin America who earned a good living through the Walker Company, effectively creating a pathway to economic empowerment for a generation of Black women. Third, she was incredibly ambitious and visionary. In 1910, she moved her headquarters to Indianapolis, establishing a state-of-the-art factory, a beauty school, and a research laboratory. She vertically integrated her business, controlling manufacturing, distribution, and sales. She traveled extensively, promoting her products and her philosophy of Black women's self-improvement and economic independence. She understood the power of image and presented herself as a successful, sophisticated businesswoman. By the time of her death in 1919, Madam C.J. Walker had built a business empire that was estimated to be worth over $1 million, making her one of the wealthiest self-made women in America, regardless of race. But her legacy was far more than just her personal fortune. She had ingeniously created a business model that addressed a specific cultural need, empowered thousands of other Black women by providing them with careers and financial independence, and became a prominent philanthropist, supporting numerous Black institutions and social causes. She used her wealth and influence to advocate for civil rights and an end to lynching. Madam C.J. Walker's story is a powerful testament to how one single woman, starting with virtually nothing, could overcome immense societal barriers to a sheer determination, business acumen, and an innovative vision, building not just an independent life for herself, but also a platform for the advancement of her entire community. Number 2. The Mythbile women who built their own independent towns within towns. In the medieval period, particularly from the 12th to the 16th centuries, a unique and remarkable social and religious movement swept across Northern Europe, especially in the Low Countries, Germany and France. This was the rise of the Beguines, laywomen who chose to live in Christian community, dedicating themselves to piety, charitable work, and often manual labor, all without taking formal, lifelong monastic vows. What made the Beguines so ingenious was their ability to create semi-autonomous communities, known as beguinages, which offered single women a life of spiritual devotion and considerable personal and economic independence, largely outside the direct control of either male relatives or the male-dominated church hierarchy. These women were typically unmarried or widowed, and they came from various social classes. Unlike nuns, Beguines did not renounce their property upon entering a community, and they were free to leave the beguinage if they chose, for instance, to marry. This flexibility was a key aspect of their appeal. Beguinages were often located within city walls, but functioned as distinct enclosures, sometimes resembling small towns with their own houses, churches, infirmaries, and workshops. Some of the larger beguinages, like those in Ghent or Bruges, housed hundreds, even thousands of women. The ingenuity of the Beguine movement lay in its innovative social and economic structure. These women supported themselves through various means. Many were involved in the textile industry, spinning wool, weaving cloth, or doing fine needlework, which were highly valued skills. Others engaged in nursing the sick, caring for the poor, or teaching children. They pooled their resources, managed their own finances, and governed their own communities, usually under the leadership of an elected Grand Mistress or Grand Dame. This self-governance was a radical departure from the typical societal roles available to women at the time. Life in a beguinage offered a safe and supportive environment where single women could pursue a spiritual life without the strictures of a convent. They could engage in mystical prayer and religious contemplation, and some Beguines became renowned for their profound spirituality and mystical writings. Figures like Hadjuich of Antwerp, Mechilde of Magdeburg, and Marguerite Porete produced influential vernacular mystical texts that explored their direct experiences of the divine. While Marguerite Porete was eventually condemned and executed for heresy because her ideas were seen as too radical, many other Beguines managed to navigate the complex religious landscape of their time, often with the support of local clergy or sympathetic laypeople. The economic independence achieved by many Beguines was crucial. By controlling their own labor and property, they avoided dependence on male family members or ecclesiastical institutions. They were active participants in the urban economies of their cities, contributing to local industries and providing essential social services. This economic self-sufficiency underpinned their social and spiritual autonomy. They were not simply recipients of charity. They were productive members of society who had carved out a unique niche for themselves. The Beguine movement faced challenges and suspicion at times. Their unconventional lifestyle, existing somewhere between lay and monastic life, sometimes drew criticism from church authorities who preferred women to be either married or enclosed in traditional convents under stricter ecclesiastical supervision. However, the movement thrived for centuries, demonstrating its resilience and the deep need it met for many women. The ingenuity of the Begans was their collective creation of a viable third way for women who did not wish to marry or become traditional nuns. They built thriving, self-sufficient communities that offered spiritual fulfillment, economic independence, and a remarkable degree of personal freedom. They were pioneers in urban living social work and female community organization, demonstrating that single women, when given the space and opportunity, could create rich, meaningful, and independent lives on their own terms, effectively building their own cities of women within the larger patriarchal structures of medieval society. Their legacy is a testament to the power of female solidarity and the enduring human quest for autonomy and purpose. Number 1. The pirate queen who commanded fleets and negotiated her own retirement. In the early 19th century, when navies ruled the seas and empires clashed for dominance, one of the most formidable and successful pirate leaders in history was not a man but a woman named Qing Shi. Her story is a breathtaking account of ingenuity, ruthlessness, and an almost unbelievable rise from desperate beginnings to commanding a pirate confederation so vast it dwarfed many national navies. She didn't just build an independent life. She built an independent maritime empire and then astoundingly negotiated her own peaceful and prosperous retirement. Qingshi, whose name is sometimes translated as Pixi, meaning widow of Pixi, was born in the late 1700s in Guangdong Province, China. Little is known of her early life, but historical accounts suggest she was a prostitute working in a floating brothel in Canton before she caught the eye of Plessis Yi, a notorious and powerful pirate commander. Around 1801, she married him. More than just a wife, she became an active partner in his piratical enterprises, involved in the strategy and organization of his growing fleet. She proved to be a capable and intelligent collaborator. When Plessis Yi died in 1807, either in a typhoon or in battle, Qingshi faced a critical moment. In a world dominated by men, especially the brutal world of piracy, a widow could easily be cast aside or lose all influence. But Qingshi was far too shrewd for that. She swiftly and ingeniously maneuvered to consolidate power. She formed a strategic alliance with Plessis Yi's adopted son and second-in-command, Cheng Po Tsai, who was also her lover. By securing Cheng Po's loyalty and support, and by leveraging the respect she had already earned among the pirate crews, she effectively took command of the entire Red Flag Fleet, the largest and most powerful of several pirate factions operating in the South China Sea. Under Qingshi's leadership, the Red Flag Fleet grew to an astonishing size. At its peak, it's estimated she commanded hundreds of ships. Some sources say as many as 1,800 vessels, and between 70,000 to 80,000 pirates, men, women, and even children. This was a force larger than many contemporary navies. Her ingenuity as a leader was evident in her strict and highly organized governance of this vast pirate confederation. She implemented a rigid code of laws that governed everything from the division of plunder. The pirates kept 20%, the rest went into a collective fund, to the treatment of captives. Disobedience was met with severe punishment, often execution. Her code was particularly notable for its rules regarding female captives. Rape was punishable by death, and if a pirate wished to take a captive woman as a wife, he had to be faithful to her or face execution. These rules, while brutal, maintained order and discipline within her massive, unruly force. Qingshi's fleet terrorized the coastal villages and shipping lanes of southern China for years. They extorted protection money, plundered merchant ships, and even defeated multiple attempts by the Dinzum Imperial Navy, as well as Portuguese and British warships, to suppress them. Her strategic acumen and the sheer might of her forces made her virtually untouchable for a considerable period. She was not just a figurehead. She was an active commander, planner, and the ultimate authority in her maritime domain. She had created an independent state on the seas, funded by plunder and governed by her own laws. Perhaps the most stunning display of Qingshi's ingenuity came when the Daitsam government, weary of its inability to defeat her, offered amnesty to all pirates who would surrender. Many pirate leaders were wary, fearing treachery, but Qingshi saw an opportunity. Instead of fighting to the bitter end, she personally led a delegation, unarmed, to negotiate with the Governor-General. She didn't just accept a pardon, she negotiated incredibly favorable terms. She managed to secure not only a full pardon for herself and her followers, but also the right for her pirates to keep their ill-gotten gains and for many of them to be integrated into the imperial bureaucracy or military. Cheng Po-tsai was even given a command in the Daidisan Navy. Qingshi herself retired from piracy, a wealthy woman. She married Cheng Po-tsai, who had also been pardoned and given an official position, and settled back in Canton. After Cheng Po's death, she continued to live a prosperous life, reportedly running a gambling house and possibly a salt smuggling operation until her own death, around 1844 at an old age for the time. She had gone from a life of extreme poverty and vulnerability to becoming one of the most powerful pirate lords in history, and then managed an exit strategy that allowed her to live out her days in peace and affluence. Qingshi's entire career was a masterclass in seizing opportunities, adapting to circumstances, exercising unparalleled strategic and political skill. She built not just an independent life, but an empire, and then cleverly dismantled it on her own terms, securing a future that few in her position could have ever imagined.